Ta-da.
Everybody, it is Brian from Summit Racing here, and today we're doing our Friday live streams. These have been something we've been doing for a little over a year now, and lots of guests. Sometimes they are machinists, engine builders, racers. It's all over the map. Sometimes famous personalities, and today we've got a guy that does a little bit of all of that. He builds. He's just a personality. He's does a lot of stuff. Today we're going to bring you Matt Happel from Sloppy Mechanics. It's a neat place. If you don't know what Sloppy Mechanics is, it's a Facebook user group where basically it was, I'll let Matt explain more about this, but basically it was his mission to educate people on just get your car running. You don't need all this and this and this to go fast. Get it running. Here's where you spend the smart money. But with that, Matt, do you want to introduce yourself there and a little bit about your background and your mission in life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it mostly started with I started a YouTube channel right when YouTube opened up, and it was mostly to chronicle the dumb things we did with cars. And as we did more and more dumb things, we found out certain ways to make the dumb things last longer. Like we would get $100 car before Cash for Clunkers and like a 84 gram Marquis and spray it with nitrous, and you get backfires. And we learned to maximize the power, because if you pop the intake off of something, you only had fun for like 5 minutes, and that's cool and all, but after you're like, I wanted to drive this thing all day, it gets annoying. And I think for some, like a lot of people, when they used to see that at our dyno days, were like, okay, the car doesn't run anymore. I hope you guys have fun for 15 seconds.
Right.
And so we started getting better at it. And I had seen a bunch of videos from Kyle Loftus on 1320 video. And I'm like, I was in the middle of, I had a G8 with a Magnuson supercharger, and I had spent a lot of money on the G8 and the blower. And I was like, I could do this a lot cheaper. I saw people doing it, so I'm like, I could do that. And I built a Fairmont for $4,200. It went tens, and there was a lot wrong with it. I built a hot side that like teed into itself incorrectly, and I had a converter that had 40% loss, and blah blah blah. So after I figured out what worked, I started sharing it and learning from people on, it was called the Turbo Forums.
Yeah.
And then I started sharing it on like LS1 Tech. And then what happened was Facebook got gigantic and no one really used those anymore. So with the YouTube page and the Facebook group, and actually we have like 3 Facebook groups. There's like a classifieds, there's a private page, which is like Fight Club. We don't talk about it. And then the public page.
Right.
So yeah, but essentially the mission is economics, and then telling people that they don't need to have an 8-second car. You don't have to prove anything to anybody, because most real hot rodders just want to do what I call ice cream and burnouts. And I say that's fantastic for a goal. Just be realistic with yourself. Yeah. And take your kids out and fry tires for 1,000 feet and get pulled over and have fun and stuff like that.
Yeah. The number is a number, and 1,000 horsepower. Everybody's got to have 1,000 horsepower. It's like 650 at the wheels will scare the bejesus out of a lot of people. And you can have a lot, a great time. 450 at the wheels, you can go run tens with that. You don't need. And speaking of that, so one of the things we wanted to talk about today was your 8F8 program. Basically going 8s for $8,000, and we're going to talk about that. And you achieve that. I'm not going to call it a miracle. I mean, you just did it and you worked through adversity and you did it. And we're going to talk about that. The other thing we're going to talk about is your new effort, where, you've got, you wanted to go 7s this time around, and you have identified, the parts that you think that you're going to need, to be able to run that number. But the other thing I want to talk about is, your tuning. You've gotten to be very, very good with tuning. A lot of people, you've helped out a lot of people, and a lot of people have helped you, because we're all kind of sharing this knowledge on how to be successful and go faster. And we do a lot of that here at Summit Racing, because, selling parts is one thing, but, we want you to enjoy your car. And then when you're ready to go faster, look us up. We've got your parts that you need, but we want you to be successful and stay in the hobby. So that's, our feeling on, helping people go fast. And it's just, what we call the pathway to performance. People hear me talk about it all the time. But going back to your tuning, when did you get the dyno? What did you start tuning with? And how do you feel like you progress in terms of your learning on just, keeping something together, to identifying things that, everybody would bring the car into your shop and it didn't have enough fuel system, didn't have the right spark plugs in it. Can you tell us a little bit about that evolution?
Yeah, so when we were being idiots with the like nitrous gram marquees and stuff like that, uh, through friends, I found out there was a dyno in our area, and it was at the paving company where I still do stuff. And the owner's name is Troy, Deal Paving, and we would go there and we'd call him to like open the doors for us to be ridiculous. And Troy's not really into that. Troy likes nice cars and everything else. So we would bring these dented up old cars and spray them with fireballs, and we'd be laughing like idiots. And he's like, "Can I go now?" kind of attitude, like not rude, but he's like, "I'm not enjoying this. Can we wrap this up so I can go?" And after a while of that, he's just like, "Hey, Matt, you know how to do all this. Here's keys and an alarm code.
Right.
Just don't bother me anymore." I mean, he never said that. He's very nice, but
Yeah.
essentially that was it. He's like, "Just do this, whatever."
Yeah.
So then, like after I had seen the Fairmont stuff and I built that Fairmont, I was starting to put my own projects on and my friends' projects on, and we would smash like torch the head off of the thing or spit the rods out of the bottom. And after a while, we figured out how not to do that. And then the big thing there was we shared all the mistakes with people, because I think maybe not so much anymore, but still a lot of people they have secrets and they won't tell you things. But I always say, if people don't know how to explain it or don't want to tell you, it's probably because they have no idea, because that's what I've learned.
Right. Right.
And then as I got better and better with this, you question people and they don't have an answer, but then I could figure it out myself. And then I would give that info to people and they could reuse it. So I'm like, okay, like, and then I would preface, I'm like, "Hey, I'm not a professional, but this works."
Right.
So then I started seeing other people doing it and it works for them too. And I'm like, well, so that's how it started going. And then more and more, like I was tuning more and more people's cars, and I definitely learned a lot. And I have a lot of friends who I learned from, and I take a little bit of all of it. I have a lot of friends who are just flat out experts. I do things they would never do. So you can't say that like, I learned everything from them, but I don't want to discredit them in any way from the knowledge I gained. But yeah, we would do dumb things. I've had the car that went tens had two different cylinder heads on it, wildly different cylinder heads. And
Right.
people are like, I had a friend that does drag radial car stuff, and he's like, I told her it made 7-11 to the tire and like another upgrade or two. And I said, "Look, it has two different cylinder heads." He's like, I would have never done that. I would never do
Right.
that.
Right.
And I'm like, well, it's cool when you don't care. And it's kind of neat it was a really neat combining thing of like luck, and like to get a dyno that's hardly ever used to learn on your own is a big lucky situation. And then to have a lot of friends who are in the cars trust me to do stuff is a big thing. They're all,
It's funny that way, because I've got, friends that are exactly like you and I, that we're just into learning and learning. And, we learn through failure. And there's a lot of people that are just like, "I never fail. I never mess up." It's like, well, that's pretty much how I learn things, it's the hard way, right? Because otherwise you're just book learning, right? Everything else has already been written. But if you really want to learn something that nobody else has done, you kind of have to push things until they break and then fix it and, figure out what went wrong. But, a couple of those people are Eric over at Backstreet. And if I go back 20 years, there's another guy named Dino Steve, and he would just let me come in and play, for half the day or 3/4 of the day just on stuff. And, just kind of like science projects. But it's always been neat, just added up. And it's knowledge that I've been able to share through some of the articles and things that we do here at Summit. So getting back to that, your horsepower numbers, I mean, if we want to try to chart, like I talk about, how we pick up maybe like 100 horsepower a year, on a given part. You started off like, let's say 650, 750.
oh, way less than that.
Right. And then you're to the point right now where you're just like 800 is like falling off of a log for you when people follow your recipes. And these recipes, by the way, folks, I want to talk about you've almost got like the Wikipedia. Can you tell people a little bit about how you help people see this little recipe of yours and how that's changed?
Yeah, so one iteration, the Colorado is something that I used to learn even more again. And the first iteration of the Colorado, I just used it to learn more about some parts. And then the second iteration, I was like, I'm going to shoot for 1,000 rear wheel to the tire on all stock everything. And then it made it to that also. And that took a lot of learning and had a bunch of mistakes. And I shared all of those too. And then I gave out that combo. Once I, dug it through the mud on everything, it's easier in hindsight to show everybody. So that's a very successful combination. And then I would always tell people what to buy, which is the Don't BS Me build.
Yeah.
But I would tell people this is all you need to have serious fun. And at some point I was like, hey, I don't need to talk about this. I'm going to be about it. Let me show you flat out. So I got all the stuff that I normally tell people, all the cheapest parts for that combination. And what's nice is there's an upgrade path on these parts. Like you can get more out of it. But there's like a line, I believe, right around 500 rear wheel where stuff gets expensive.
Yeah.
But right around 500, 550 tire, pump gas, automatic is very easy to do. And I was like, let me show you. So I got a $200 4.8 to prove that you don't need a bigger motor. And I bought a used PTC billet converter, like all these cheaper parts, and 7875 and pack 1218s. The springs, I love those springs.
Yeah.
They're $135. And then the sloppy stage 2 cam is like $250 most of the time. Sometimes it's been cheaper, but now you got to watch out because there's a lot of Chinese copies that are probably not built with longevity. So, but yeah, I set out that whole combo, and it even has decapped stock truck injectors, because roughly the smallest decap injector is 75 pounds, which is plenty to make 550 on gasoline. And people started building that, and man, like most of the cars I tune are an exact copy of that. And the capability of that Gen 1 billet turbo was about 800 rear wheel.
Right.
And the funny thing is they have like a 3,000 pound Fox and they say they want 850. And that is wild. Like I tell people an 850 in a Fox rear wheel will go 850s with mediocre launch and suspension.
Right.
Like 164 miles an hour, 850s. And then once people realize that, they're like, wow. Yeah.
It's awesome. All right. So I'm going to put on my glasses here. So what's fun about these live streams, and I want to encourage people, we did a post on this a little bit earlier. You guys are from all over the world, all over the United States, all walks of life. You do a little bit of everything, but we'd encourage you to just go ahead and tell us your name, where you're from. And what we're going to try to do today is sometimes the comments pour in so quick that we can't hit them like right when you ask, but we're going to try to go through some of these comments and questions and just answer as many as we can. The ones that we can't hit today, during the video, we're going to try to come back in, Matt and I, and just try to answer and give answers. And we also have some other associates here at Summit Racing, that are watching this today, not on the clock, by the way, just because they love us. And they're actually going to come through and kind of, give you some part numbers here and there if you need them. But anyway, we encourage you to, participate in it because that is most of what makes these live streams fun. So some of the people that have joined us, we had Jeremy Rich kind of get things started with us, and Dave K and Del Cole and Cody Durio. And then we've got, oh boy,
Ryan Jans is my friend. That's why
he said, this guy's out of touch with reality. He didn't figure out the sloppy tax, which I was going to laugh at because when you talked about the sloppy stage 2, when we were developing, the Pro LS cams here at Summit Racing, that cam was awesome. Great price cam, ran extremely well. And it's like, okay, we need to look at this thing. And it was really never meant to be necessarily a turbo cam, but it really worked out well for that. So we figured out what it is that makes it really do well at two things at once. And then we tweaked on it a little bit. And our some dash 8706R1 is actually kind of an offshoot of the very famous sloppy stage 2 cam. And there's, there's several companies that have, versions of that thing, but pretty cool little deal too. And then, hey, Ryan, thank you again for that. Let's see. We got Cody here. We got Sean. We got Charlie Adam. Oh, this is a good one. Oh boy, Charlie Adams. Matt, this is a little early. What is your dream build? I mean, it's got to always evolve, but I mean, for this point in time, I mean, you're working on your 7-second ride, but what do you think there?
I don't think I'll ever be able to answer that. I just want to build a ton of things. Like all the time I want to change. So I guess my dream is to always make something else. Is that a cop-out answer? Or
No, it's not. And I think most of us, have this automotive ADHD where, things are always kind of evolving. I really can't concentrate on any one car, for very long. And my friends are the ones here locally that kind of keep me targeted, like, Brian, get this done, stay on this until you get it done and then move over. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not, but we're going to be doing this for the rest of our lives. So speaking about the rest of our lives, you've got somebody there that helps guide you in terms of, your purchases and your family. You want to talk a little bit about your wife a little bit and your family situation?
Oh, yeah. So my wife, Jamie, and I have a son. His name's Dylan. He's 3.5. Yep. And definitely my wife, Jamie, is the most responsible person. And I definitely listen to her a lot because I would just still be buying Fairmonts. There's a difficulty with buying Fairmonts now, though. Someone has increased their worth about 10 times. It's disgusting. So even though I like them a lot, it's hard. You can't even really get them anymore for a decent price. But I would do a lot of the same things. So she's the person that recommended like the Colorado and that stuff. And she's the one that said I should build the G and do something different and do stick shift. And then she bought me this gray Mustang because the red 8s-for-8 one was such a pain. She got me this one. She's like, here's another Mustang. Get rid of the other one.
Right. And she's a VW person, isn't she?
Yeah, she really likes German cars. So she has Volkswagens, Porsche, Audi, that stuff.
That's cool. So, like, how did the sun play into this thing? Because we've all kind of gone through, this place where I could be up all night and working all night and be out in the garage and then go racing all weekend and footloose and fancy free. But then you have a kid, and you've been able to like still do what you do with your kid a lot. And I see your posts, and you've invited him, into your life to go do this stuff with you at a very early age. Do you want to talk about how that's kind of factored into, your day to day?
Yeah, and now I used to be like, guys, just work on it, but now I understand where if you have a kid and everything else, it's definitely slowed me down. But I don't say that in a negative way. I like doing a lot with him, so that's where I always say that like an hour a day goes a long way. A lot of other people say it, but it makes a lot of sense. It's easy to let something sit and then not get back to it at all, but if you just it goes by fast if you just do a little bit all the time. There's another saying, like, how do you eat an elephant? And it's like one bite at a time. Like,
yeah,
figure out what you can get done and do that. And if you can't do it, whatever, think about it later. There's usually something. Like, even if you have nothing, you could probably clean up your workspace.
It's true. One of the mechanisms that I use myself is I never try to take something so much apart that I can't get it back together in the same weekend. So it's like, checking out push rod lengths or something like that is something I'm doing where, intake's off, valve covers off, going to mess with all that stuff, but I can have it together by Sunday night. So it never comes back apart to this, just this big mess that ends up in my garage.
That's 100% a big failure point. I feel like with people is they get an LS and they completely shred it down to nothing, and then it sits in a pile and rusts.
Right. Exactly.
Just don't do that.
Right. So we've got a good one here from Phil, and this is I'm going to put on my salesman, hat a little bit here. Here at Summit Racing, we do have all the parts that you need to put this thing together, and we do. We tell you in a lot of cases, if you're going to buy an LS engine out of a junkyard, you don't buy a block and a crank and a rod from 19 different places. Buy the entire engine, with all the fuel rails and all the wiring harness and all that stuff. Start off with something that's mostly there so it doesn't nickel and dime you to death with the little parts. But Phil's question is, he's building LH6 aluminum 5.3, and he's going with a couple GT45s. What's the affordable way, in quotations, to build a fuel system, pumps, lines, etc.?
Well, like noting on what you were saying, I'm trying to get better at not interrupting people, so I'm awful. But I always say the most complete engine for your money, unless you know exactly what you're doing and you're seasoned and you want something and you're going to get it done, get the most complete engine for your money. You even spend a little bit more to get it from a place with a warranty. Like if you take it apart and it's a glitter fest, a lot of times, like I used to pull motors, but they used to be $80 a piece, and then I didn't have a child and everything else. So now I find it's easier to do certain things. Like when your time gets limited, it's worth your time and money to let someone else build you a wiring harness or whatever else. Like I'm glad I learned how to do all that and develop the skills, but a lot of times it's easier. But another thing that I would pick on this guy for is twin GT45s will take an hour to spool on a 5.3, like a solid hour. So try not to use those turbos. And then affordable way to build a fuel system, I would say, like you were mentioning, I'm not sure what an LH6 is, but if it has cathedral heads, you should put an early Gen 3 truck intake on it because they have return fuel rails built in. And we have return fuel rails on my friend's 920 car.
Mm-hmm.
Gen 3, stock rails, stock feed and regulator. Car goes 920. So most people aren't going to go 920, at least not their first time, first year, first build. So people don't like them because they look ugly, or they think they need rails, or they think you don't need any of that. So don't waste any money on the intake side because no one wants those Gen 3s with the return rails, to be honest. So you can just have the
little bodies and things. Yeah. Everybody wants the TBSS intake and all the 2009 and laters that are closely patterned after it, because they do make power, but you're right, that fuel system is big. So the fuel lines, the factory fuel lines in the vehicles are very good. And in terms of pumps, there's a lot of different ways to go. I mean, starting off with good old 255s and inline pumps where you're basically, running one pump to pressurize, the inlet to another pump, stacking pumps on top of each other. So there's, some fairly good ways to do that. There's also surge tanks.
It depends on a horsepower goal. That's what I always tell people. There's the goal, always have a goal, and then everything else from there. Because if you told us your goal right now was to run a certain time at a certain vehicle weight, we would tell you that Ford GT45s are bad. Like a single 78, 75 would be better. And then if you say you want to make 650 wheel with E85, we'd be able to tell you which pumps and injectors you would need. And it's all a giant sizing equation. And I think what people get wrong most of the time is oversizing something and undersizing something else and not getting a potential out of what they were trying to do. And a lot of that is confusing, and they don't know. It's no fault of their own. So that's why I give out those recipes where everything's scaled to work within 80% of each other. And that's where you get the most economical piece for what you need.
Right. So Ryan's helping us out here a little bit with that. By the way, we've got, if you just type in into our customer service section on our website, we've got spec articles for every single one of the 46 RPO codes that made up the Gen 3s and 4s. So what's an RPO code? Well, LS1 is only one. LQ4, LQ9, those are a couple more, but there's actually 46 of them. And between the Gen 3s, they were fairly stable, 5.3s and 6 liters and the 5.7s. And then you got into Gen 4, where you have iron blocks and aluminum blocks, even starting off at 5.3s and the 6.0s by that time. And there's AFM and VVT, et cetera. You can find all of the specs, the camshafts they came with, the injectors, the flows, the cylinder heads. There's lots of details. So if you go into the customer help section on the Summit website and you go into the search bar and you type in an RPO code, you're going to find a spec article, you're going to find an RPO code. But in our case, we have our own expert online with Ryan, And he's like 799 Cathedral Heads Gen 4 with AFM, and he says he's got 2 of them. But Jordan Walsh's comment was, how much power do you really need to push a Fox into the 799 zone? And with that, we should probably talk about weight, because there's a lot of, cars that are very, very light, and they've spent a lot of money to get light. And then there's other cars that are just light because they've taken off every darn thing that they can, and but they haven't spent more money on lightness. Do you want to, kind of give us your thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I would say it's a weight is a giant factor. So if he can say what the car weighs, but a Fox, I'll just speculate. Most people's street-driven Foxes are on the 3,000 pound range with them in it. If it has like a tube K and a bunch of things on the heavy end of like the heavier GT with the giant glass window, full weight, all the other stuff, they're right around 3,300 pounds with a driver. Most of the all across the board. So if you have a car with a driver that's 3,050 pounds or 3,100 pounds, it doesn't take a whole lot to make a car go a 7. It just takes a good suspension setup. You just need a 60 like crazy, which isn't terribly hard at all on a Fox also. But right around 1,000 rear wheel will nick you like a 780 at 174.
Right. So with that, let's go ahead and get into a little bit about how you stack the deck a little bit with 8F8. If you want to talk about that a little bit. Arthur, thanks for popping in there with the resources there, so we can click on those a little later. But so at one point, everybody was going 10s and everybody had this thing figured out, and you just wanted to do something pretty ludicrous, and you're figuring out the recipe for running 8s, and you started stacking things up in terms of how many dollars you thought you could probably get the job done for. And you came up with one number and you padded it maybe a little bit. Do you want to tell us about how you conceived of the 8F8 project?
Oh, I just figured that a lot of people found that as an impossible goal. And I even had friends that have spent $40,000 on a car and can't get it into the 8s. And I'm like, I could, as with everything I do, the economical and the using what you have to the best of its ability instead of wasting stuff in every direction and burning yourself out and not getting a goal. Over 15 years of doing this mostly successfully, I've learned a lot about how to not do it. So I've had enough friends with fairly fast cars where I'm like, this is all we need to do, and it should be right there. Because people think you need a ton of power, but if your car leaves well, it really doesn't need a whole lot. Like, you can have a 400 rear wheel Fox that goes 10s if it leaves. And
right.
Again, like, a lot of people are missing that. They all want to foot brake and have really long rear gears and just the opposite of what they should be doing. And then they end up tracking the car more than they street drive it. And then they're like, oh, it's not that great at the track. Well, of course. So the big thing there was a lot of people think it's expensive. And I'm like, if you want an 8-second car, you can do it. And they're like, whatever. And I'm like, okay. I even said to my wife, I said, this is going to make a lot of people mad, including people I know. But I thought it would be very easy to do. And a lot of people laughed. But I'm like, in my head, this should be very easy. So in the beginning of that video, I explained, because people are like, you need to buy a car. It has to be a clean V8 car, like people do dumb things. They buy a clean V8 car to cut it. And then they have to spend a ton of money on suspension and everything else. And I'm like, all you have to do is look for an ugly roller that someone put a bunch of money into and it's been collecting dust, and you buy it.
Yep.
Because people, they get that much money into a car and then they build a Ford engine and transmission for 15 grand, and then they're not making rent and they have to quit the project.
Right.
Not to make fun of people, but a lot of people overspend and don't get the car running. Like you said, take it apart to a point where it's depressing more than it is getting ahead. Everything else, and no reservations there. A long-term race car project like that is daunting. So that's why I think you need that knowledge of just buying one and jamming the motor in and having fun. David Freiberger has a saying where he says it doesn't need to be right, it just needs to be running.
Right.
So something like that.
That's a go-to. I love his stuff. And in fact, your name actually came up when we were talking with him as well. We were talking about just, we're going to get sidetracked. It's just going to happen. And that's okay. It's Friday, right? So, but what we were talking about is with all the people starting up YouTube channels, doing all manner of different stuff. And then people, they want to be Matt Happel, right? And then there are some of them that, they're not doing the work, right? Or they just haven't done enough of the work yet, to really say one way or another. But then there's other guys, that really have developed a following. They've given really good, solid advice. And we're huge supporters of that, because where we used to have a lot of print magazines, we don't have that as much anymore, although there is a bit of a resurgence, but it used to be the forums were the places for people to get their information. The only problem with the forums really is that you kind of get a few people that kind of end up, being like the demigod, right? Of all this stuff, and everybody just kind of shuts up and goes away at some point, which isn't very fun, versus, the Facebook user groups where whole bunches of people just pile on and it's a bunch of crazy, but there's some really good nuggets in there. And from that, the cream rises to the top, as it always does. So your name came up as one of the people that, if I think about how many people you've educated over the last, say 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whereas I grew up with Carcraft and Hot Rod and, Circle Track magazine and such, really your forum and your user group here has really been, the same thing to a lot of people. And, Freiberger knows that, it's been a great thing for everybody.
Oh, well, thanks.
Yeah. True story. So we keep on going down. So we've got Anthony Bolsano. He says, I've got some QA1 shocks, dual adjustables. Where's a good starting point on my Fox body? So great shock. In terms of coilovers, in terms of a shock setting, a number on a dial, that's impossible to say, but there are some things, where you can get some behavior, and some of that is simply by just looking at suspension travel. If you're not getting your front shock to, full travel, you probably need to be running a lighter rate, longer spring, so that eventually you are topping out your shock. I mean, that's when you're getting the most weight transfer to the back. And there is another point where you've gone too far, and Matt was talking about it yesterday, where when you were letting 8F8 fly and you're doing a wheelie for 130 feet and you're wasting, what should be forward motion on vertical motion, you've gone too far. So that's why we can't give you one answer. But Matt, do you want to weigh in on that a little bit in terms of a 13-second car versus an 8-second car?
I'm not too great at suspension. What I would do is whatever dials are there, put them in the middle and see what the car does. And then you could even ask some people at the track, or you could do it yourself. Start go this way and then go that way and see if it acts better. If you ask some of the people there to watch it, they can let you know if it's bouncing or doing whatever. Like if it's bringing the front end up and immediately putting it down. What's hilarious is the 8s4 8 car, none of the dials worked. Whatever we did didn't work at all. So they were already blown out from sitting since 2012.
Right.
So we had to laugh about that. And then the other thing was we were kind of in a rush to get to the track. It was December 8th. We didn't think we would get much more hits on it. And we should have at least bought like Home Depot chains to build limiters, because hitting that with enough power to go an 8 was giving it some pretty crazy wheelies, because our suspension was not adjustable.
Right.
It wasn't adjustable at all. So that's the funny thing with that. I would say most cars don't leave really well enough to get into most settings. Most of the cars I've built and raced were foot brake cars, so you almost don't need to do anything. But to get an 8 out of a car that makes 700 wheel, you definitely need a trans brake, and we knew it was going to hook really well. So we were at a fine line about, it's a 4.8, so it does not have a lot of bottom end. So you had to leave on a certain amount of boost for it to get out of its own way, which is hilarious because on low boost on everything with a mediocre launch, it would still go like a 1020 or a 990. It made like 474 rear wheel on 6 pounds, and it would still go a 10 because of weight and leave.
Yeah.
but it cut like a 127 at a 45-degree angle through the Christmas tree area. So it would have been a much better 60, and it would have,
The back tires, right?
yeah, I think it went 568 in the eighth.
Right.
So
Exactly.
it was hustling.
So one of the things for, the folks that are Summit customers that aren't familiar with, Matt and Sloppy and all this stuff, um, you know, we, us older folks, I'm 49, we came up with cubic inches, right? There's no replacement for cubic inches. And then that quickly became, well, there is a replacement for displacement. It's called boost. And so there was that. But then even, I want to say 15 years ago, it was like, well, how big of an engine can you run? So we were all running 6 liters, and the pricing, for 6 liters was sky high. And then Matt, and a few others, there weren't too many. I think Matt was among the first. He's like, why am I spending 6-liter money on something when I can buy these 5.3s? And by the way, the 5.3s are better for boost than the 6-liter, stronger cylinder walls and such, and so then, the $300 5.3 got to be $900 due to the sloppy tax. And so now everybody's on to 4.8s, which are everywhere. And what's really great about a 4.8 is they don't have all the, sorry, GM engineers, the junk inside, the VVT, the AFM that has to be ripped out and replaced anyway. They were all very simple engines. So even the 4.8s right now are making a pretty big resurgence. And I want to tell you, Summit with our Pro LS line, we are not ignoring 4.8s at all. We are developing parts for them. So keep your eyes out. We got some pretty nice parts for 4.8s on the way that are going to help them go even faster. So anyway, you want to get back into, those engines spin like no tomorrow. You've got the same bore as a 5.3, but it's a shorter stroke even yet. So those engines are, they want to turn 7,500, 8,000 if you've got the valve train to do it. What were your thoughts on, you like your packed springs there, the beehives, but in terms of RPM and converter, you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, with the LS stuff, you can hurt it with a lot of torque and power below like 5,500, in my opinion. So we used to smash stuff or bend rods, but then what we found out was just tuning around that torque number or getting the power in above 5,500 is a big thing. And then after my one converter had 40% slip, we started to learn a lot about converters, and you want one that comes up quick to keep you out of the danger zone, and it'll foot brake and leave really well, but then you don't want one that'll drag down on shifts enough to get you into a hurdy area. So the other thing you can do is you can give the motor more RPM, which doesn't always make it go faster, but it stops it from hurting itself. And the other thing is, like, the pack springs aren't great for super high. There's probably some stability issues up there, but it'll still go fast. Like, that's the funny thing about all those setups is, and then a lot of times, like you said, I like the 4.8s a lot because people don't like to use them. So I'll always grab whatever people don't like and then find a way to use it. Like Fairmonts, people didn't like Fairmonts. At least they probably still don't, but they were a cheap platform. So that's why I would buy them, because they were crappy old Fords, and I have a thing for crappy old Fords. But
that's awesome. So Ryan wants to talk converters too. So Anthony wants to know, what about if you're leaving off the trans brake? So when we talk about the engine coming back down on the shift and things like that, if your average LS is making peak torque roughly 4,500 RPM. So peak torque is where you have the most cylinder pressure. And if you ignite it a little bit too soon, that's when you pop head gaskets. That's when you bend connecting rods. And so basically how a lot of people are going fast is they will basically let the torque rise to a certain point, and then they will basically control boost to keep that torque number flatlined. Well, if you're making that same, say, 600 foot-pounds of torque at, say, 6,000 RPM instead of 4,500, that horsepower number is going sky high. But the fact is that with boost and with boost control, you can basically limit, your torque to a certain number, and that's how, people are getting the reliability where they know at say 600 foot-pounds of torque, with X amount of timing, that they're not going to be lifting heads or bending rods. So that's basically what we're using, to do that. So you can use boost, you can use timing. Timing is probably an easy way to do it. The only downside, to using the timing to do that is the later that you light the spark, the more that you're lighting the fire past your exhaust valve. So your exhaust valve is now getting very hot, and that can cause other problems, breaking. So there's a couple different mechanisms you can use. But so when you talk about your tuning a little bit, do you have any, torque numbers that you're kind of shooting for, or are there other things yet that you're looking at?
Most of the time, I like to see, I think that guy meant off a trans brake about his suspension again. Maybe he can trans brake for, I don't know what he means by that. And so this guy says, do you want a tighter converter with boost? It's not about what's tight or loose. It's about a good converter for your combination. Everything can change. So people all the time say, whatever. And I'm like, it's not black and white most of the time. You need one set up, especially for what you're doing. So that's like with the 848 car, I had Jake's Performance set me up with a converter. And I said, so that car, the converter would grab on low boost fairly early. But then with anything over like 600, 700 range, it would go right to 6,100 and then make mile an hour. So that's an easy way to get away from the too much torque down low. And there's another number is, like I said, mechanically, you just want to be over that number. So it can never go below it. So that's what I say to people. You want to be over 6,000, but have the converter throw down a lot of mile an hour up there. And you can have both. You just need to be realistic or work with somebody that can do that. And it might not happen the first time. So a lot of people get disappointed when their converter doesn't work the way they want. But they will change 6 camshafts and swap 4 turbos, but not change the converter. And it's similar to, like I said to you, they won't change their rear gear to suit their power. So that's like what I would say about a lot of that. And then I think he might be saying, if you're leaving off a trans brake, how do you not hurt the motor? And like I was saying, you use you have like single digit ignition in certain spots. Like you're really getting rid of that. So like you said, it builds a lot of heat, but you want your mechanical setup to go right to 6,000 anyway. So even if you are, what's that?
It does spool a turbo. Yeah.
That does the same thing too. Yeah. So, even with that 4.8 at 3,500 RPM, I could make whatever boost I wanted. And I actually turned it up a lot the one day, and I got it a little over 18 pounds, and I lifted because I was like, I'm going to throw my rods out of my garage, like at a standstill here. So at only 13 pounds was enough to do a wheelie for most of the track. Right. Ironically. So
that's
a lot of each setup is different for vehicle weight and setup and your goal. And it's tough. Like I always used to give people a poor response, in my opinion. I feel like I've grown up a lot. They don't know. It's not their fault. So like they ask for a certain thing, and I'm like, it's the sum of all of it. You can't. So they'll be like, what's a good turbo? And I'm like, well, that is a can of worms. So then I try to, like, this is the whole thing with sloppy, right? You try to educate so they can do what they. So then I say, you need to be realistic with your goals, or else, all of that's going to fall apart.
Yeah. So we've got some other ones, and this is going to take us a little bit off the beaten path over here. We have Cody Durio. He says, I'll just try to read verbatim if I can. So my going project is a 92 C1500 pickup, which we love our trucks. And it's got a small block Chevy with a stroker. It's going to be getting some nitrous. It's mostly a street truck, and I'd like to keep it that way, but it's around 4,000 pounds. How can I use that weight to my advantage? Well, that's not easy. So I guess with Matt, we can get into this a little bit, but what I would basically say is if you're going to stick around 4,000 pounds, move as much of that 4,000 pounds off the front of your truck and put it in the back of your truck. Whatever you can do to take weight off the nose to get it to transfer to the back is going to be the most important. Think about the height of your truck. Something that, is basically nose down in the front looks great. It's got some great stance, but does it transfer weight as something that's kind of flat? No, it doesn't. So, think about that. Think about some ways that you could try to take some weight off the nose of that, and it's definitely going to help hook. The nice thing about it is you have all the room in the world for big wheels and tires in the back of the thing. So, spend your money there, not even necessarily on the wheels, although we're going to get back into that, because if you notice right back behind Matt over here, you have some really awesome brand new Summit Racing wheels that we've introduced that are going to go on his next project, but still a great value. But there again, 10 wide, wheel, a fairly inexpensive tire, traction is going to go a long way. The converter is big. If you can stand it, try to get yourself into a 4,000 or 4,500 converter. If it's just going to be a weekend toy, I know it sounds ridiculous, but 4,500 converter, it's not that terrible if it's just something on the weekend. If you're daily driving the thing, yeah, sure, you got to stick around 3 to 32 or maybe even 35, and it depends if you have a lockup converter. So I've been talking too much. Matt, go ahead and give us your point on that one.
Yeah, I would say most people are totally fine with a 3000. And then I would say most turbo converters are tighter than what people think. So, and I hate using the word tight and loose, but it's a good describer for, so you might have a 4000 converter, so 4000 RPM max on like a trans brake. But that's going to drive around pretty nice. Most of them aren't that. There's some converters which I think a lot of people have the knowledge or what they've seen is the converter has to go to 4000 to move at all. So there's plenty of them that are built that'll drive nicer than that. Like they will get out of their own way at 2000 and drive around. But then when you need it, it'll come up to 4. And then a turbo converter, in my experience, has almost two different RPM speeds where it grabs. So it'll, at a lower horsepower, it'll grab lower, and then once the boost comes in, it'll be higher, which is a lot of converters, right? So if you're hitting it with the same amount of power, it's the same spot. But if you have a turbo car and you're tripling your power, it's going to get pushed. So you got to make sure it's happy in both places, and that's where some people with knowledge work their magic. So you might have one that drives nice and goes to 3, but it's making 300 horsepower. So then when it gets smacked with 800, it needs to be able to hold also. So there's magic there with them making your leave RPM get to it and then hold up top, which is especially interesting with a 4.8 sometimes because not a lot of down low. Right. And then if you make it loose enough, it's not really going to hold up top. But again, like a lot of speculation there, but someone who's good at their job can make all that work. And Jake's nailed it on the first hit.
Yeah. And so I want to bring this concept up a little bit. When you're first building your truck and it's naturally aspirated and you've got a 5.3, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to make, say, 350, foot-pounds of torque, right, at the very peak at 4,500 or whatever. The minute you start introducing boost to this thing, 350 foot-pounds of torque, 450 foot-pounds of torque, 550 foot-pounds of torque, 650 foot-pounds of torque, it is all just basically the turn of a screw. And how can one converter stall, make up for a 400 foot-pound potential difference in torque just by what the tuner is going to do with the tune? But that's where all the fun and magic comes in. So we've got one of my favorite associates here, customers, friends, Austin Jennings. So Austin also goes by Maven. So the Summit Stage 3 NA cam headers and cold air intake will make 400 plus rear wheel horsepower. Yeah. So this is kind of a fun one here. We actually, with our Pro LS line, we had a Stage 1 turbo cam. It was a 222 at 50 cam. It was almost kind of just slightly bigger, than that Elgin 218 cam that you're pretty fond of for the smaller 4.8s and 5.3s on the street. But that was our, Stage 1 turbo cam. It had like -3 degrees of overlap in it, and it worked great for turbo. But we were having a lot of people that were just running it as a stealth cam. And so Austin, he'd run tons and tons of different cams through his engines. He'd, just like a 4th gen F-body fanatic. And he's like, I've run, the 228Rs and blah, 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 blah. I want something different. So we ended up putting him into this 222 cam, and he ran it, made some tremendous horsepower with it with one of our mutual friends, Caesar. We ended up naming the cam. What he named it was the Ghost Cam. So a cam that has really good manners. If you turn the idle up a little bit high, it's kind of pretty smooth. You don't even barely know it's there. If you want a little bit more of an idle, you can lower it to 150 RPM and, the cackle starts coming out of it. But also, that overlap on the cams kind of plays into, it's another subject we can probably get into today, but what makes for a good turbo cam versus what doesn't. Your experience with turbo cams, you've been up into probably the low 230s. I think the cam, one of the bigger cams you had in 8F8 was about a 232 at 50 cam, right?
From PCMs for less, yeah.
Yeah, good cam. And then you also had our Stage 2 cam in there, the 8706, and you had your cam in there, and there was a little bit of a difference in the low end in terms of where it would make torque, but really for that project, you weren't really caring so much about what happened at 3,500 or 4,000 because you were really more concerned about what was going on in the 5,000 to say 7,000, 7,500 range, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the converter would come up even on low boost. It would be like about a 5,000 where it started to couple in. And then all three of those cams made the same power, a little bit different amount of boost, but the car was turbine limited, so it would make the same power on every cam.
Yeah.
They were all very similar cams too, so.
Yeah, if you really think about it, I mean, how big of a difference is it? 226 versus 232.
That's what I thought also is they're nearly the same size. So
yeah, there is seat timing which changes a lot, and there are things that we do with the cams to make them happy with a certain spring, like our 550 lift cams, like we use a lot of on the trucks. Those are designed around the LS6 spring, which has 90 pounds of seat. Any of our 600 lift cams are all developed around the Beehive there. The 600, deal with 130 pounds of seat. And if you see some of our cams that are 625 lift, that those are designed around the 2500 286 duals, which they start off at about 145 to 160 at the seat. So, we basically develop the lobes around the valve springs that are the most common in use. And so that's how you keep these engines really happy at, say, 7,500. Not to get sidetracked there too much on cams, but it used to be people would go for the most aggressive lobe that they possibly could, but it'd have a really hard sign off, say 6,200 or 6,500, where it just went off a cliff, versus if you smooth the lobe a little bit, you lost 3 horsepower, but then you could gain, 1,000 RPM of usable horsepower. And that area under the curve is really what gets the car down the track. So
people still overcam, in my opinion. Yeah, they're like, I have a stage 4. You and I know that that's not. I can tell them too. They don't care.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Holdner did his very famous test. I won't go into exactly how the ruckus started with the stage 2 cams and the sloppy stage 2 versus the world test that Richard Holdner did, but it was awesome. I mean, it was the true, let's go ahead and run what you brought. Everybody had the opportunity to send their camshaft into battle.
And I think that's something, not to be egomaniac, but I was able to facilitate so I could make everybody do that, and they were genuinely interested in doing that. Because I don't think a couple people will probably send something to Richard, but I called everybody out, so they sent them in.
You did.
I was like, everybody, you want to talk a big game, send him 10 camshafts. Send him, because he won't make anything up.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's just brilliant. And we love his testing because it's back to back. It's on the same day. And, it's kind of funny about Richard is he can see the good in everything. And so in that particular test, the very, very, very top cam in that entire test was one of Billy Godbold's latest designs. It had eked out a little bit more horsepower at the very, very top. Our 8706 R1 did really good in that 226 range versus everybody else's cam in that range. So we were proud of that, but we also had a ringer in that. And we actually sent in our 8720 cam, which was a 218 at 50 camshaft that we commonly use in our trucks. But that smaller cam with his cubic inch displacement engine that he tested on with where we closed the intake valve with that particular cam made way more power down at 3,500. and in a lot of people's opinion, won that particular test because if you think about it, 3,500 on the street, that's probably where your converter's really locking up. That little 218 cam was really better than all the bigger cams, including our own, stage 2 cam in that test. So, you and I have both done a lot to try to tell people you don't need the stage 3 or 4 cam. You're really probably better off running one of the smaller cams, getting the thing to light off, getting the thing to launch, and then using the turbo to do the work, to make the horsepower rather than try to get it all with the camshaft. There's a lot of exceptions, and we're going to have some bigger twin turbo cams coming out at this sometime soon, maybe, probably.
Yeah,
But
like I always tell people this, that sloppy stage 1, which people don't even know or care about, it's like a 216, 218.
yeah,
It makes identical power, has way better idle vacuum, and has much nicer drivability, but it doesn't chop. So that's one of those things where I learned people don't care. People don't care. They just want it to chop. So I would tell people to use that cam, and they would put it in a build I was going to tune, and they're like, "Is this cam right?"
Do I even have a cam in it?
And I'm like, "Yeah, it's fantastic, isn't it?" And they're like, "I put this cam in, and it doesn't." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, here we go."
It's
But
awesome.
yeah, I have about like 10 more minutes, so I'm sorry, but
Yeah. No, it's cool. We'll make this pretty quick. So let's go ahead, and we had Gus come in. He's got a pretty good video here. Ryan came back in again. Real quick, let's go ahead and light this thing up with, let's get into the 7-second project. We've sent you some goodies, to help the 7-second project, go on. So you went, how fast do you go with 8s? And then what did you decide you needed to try to get into the 7s?
well, the other part of that is the first car was like a how cheap can you do it? Like a tin can, whatever. So then this one was going to be have your cake and eat it too. So make like a full weight car. And if you had the money to do so, what would you buy? So luckily everybody's chipping in to help me out with that. So like this is all stuff I would buy if I had the chance. Like you with the stroker kit, you're like, what would you do? And I'm like, I would do something dumb like build a stroker but a small bore. And you're like, okay, cool.
Yeah,
And I'm like, I just want to do that because no one really does. So the whole part of me that wants to experiment but not waste the economics, like loves being able to test that stuff. So
right. So real quick on that, because everybody's going to hate on it until they see what it does. Why did we put an expensive, and it's not even expensive.
that's the whole thing.
Right. It's a $699 forged steel crankshaft that you can go make 1,400 wheel horsepower with, no problem. Done. The end. All right. But here's the fun part about it. Why are we putting a 4-inch stroker crank in a 5.3 block? Well, the fact is you have the small bore, you got really thick cylinders, you've got really good, retention of the head gaskets. So you have that there, but at the same time, you have the stroker, you've got 360 cubic inches. So now you've got some cubic inches. Well, do turbos need cubic inches? Well, not necessarily, but it allows people like the VS Racing turbos that we sell. Now you can upsize the turbo and still get them to light at a normal RPM by putting some more cubic inch engine, bigger cubic inch engine underneath that thing. So now you're able to run a bigger turbo, a bigger AR, bigger hot side, that wouldn't spool worth a darn, on a 5.3, but now you've got 360 cubic inches, more turbo, more horsepower, good sealing of the head gasket. So that is the reason why we did it, and Matt's going to prove it out. But go ahead and keep on going with some of the other parts there that you have in the build in terms of suspension. Obviously, the wheels back behind you, we got some of the new wheels that Summit's offering for you. But, what are the other things you needed to go fast?
Well, I figured like that build would be cool because same thing, like the smaller bore and the aftermarket heads that have a much thicker deck. I didn't even know about that until my engine builder showed me. The deck is like 3 times the thickness. It's incredible. And then nice turbos, everything else. I thought it would do best. I figure these turbos will do about 11 or 1300, which should be all it needs on a good leave to get there at a certain weight. But the other thing is nice suspension will help out a whole lot. So Otherwise, I would do my standard like children's softballs in the spring and whatever else. So luckily, you guys were like, "Hey, how about we send you some fancy rear shocks and everything else?" Because I was looking into that anyway, like I said to you, and then I always struggle with asking for things. So I buy stuff, and then people like you or my other sponsors are like, "Why didn't you ask?" So over time now I'm like, hey, and you're like, yes. I'm like, okay, this is so strange to me, but okay. So you sent like super nice QA1 adjustable coilovers for the back,
Right.
and
And some of the brackets and some of that stuff, and then the wheels. But, one of our goals with that is like, why are we helping out on parts? Well, we're a big believer in the recipe, right? So, you're doing your part by helping, put all of these parts together. You're going to show people, what parts are needed to go run this number. And then in all these articles we do, the videos that we do, we can basically show them the links onto the Summit web pages of like, okay, you need this, this, and this. Here it is right here. Here's what Matt used to get in the sevens. The part obviously, held up in his car. So that's the reason why we love participating in this thing is, people giving, people getting a recipe that's going to work.
yeah, exactly. That's another thing that you guys that I early on I didn't know you guys were doing that, but now obviously you have that on all cylinders and everything else. You should almost start combining like some of the sloppy wiki in there because I hate the Google wiki page. I hate it, and I'm not an artist or good at making that stuff nice at all.
Well, that's easily done. We've got a really talented team of people, here at Summit Racing that are enthusiasts. They're riders and tremendously talented in that respect, but they're hot rodders at the same time. And yeah, we could really take anything and really tune it up and make it very usable and easy to find, where you could make it easy to solve your day. The other thing that we do here at Summit is we put things into combos where it may be, this ECU from Holly and this fuel pump from, Aeromotive and blah, 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 blah. We can put these things into combos so that you don't have to spend an hour, looking up, the 6 different parts that you need to go fast. We can put these all into, a combo, and it's just like click, done, fill up the shopping cart on down the road, and time is money, but it also allows you to get back out to the garage and build your car.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's no, go ahead.
Anything else? I mean, you got kids, family, work, and all that stuff. Yeah, today.
Nothing else. I just want to say thanks to you guys for helping out with so many things, and thanks to all the other people that helped me out. And you're always good for like ideas and everything. And I frequently, and it's not at all because you guys give me stuff. I forward people to you. Your attitude and knowledge is because a lot of people are like, I can't find a sloppy stage 2 anywhere. And I'm like, these other cams are better. Like the BTR 2 and your 2 are better. And then what's nice is you're available like all the time. Whenever someone's on sloppy and they're like, I tow and I want to do this. And I'm like, don't just buy something, talk to Brian and get what you need. It's you're going to be happier if you just listen. So
yeah, it is all just, it's about being a guidance counselor. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. It's my vocation. It's helping people go faster, giving them guidance, giving them a recipe, trying to help them be successful. Then they come back and when they want to go faster yet, because nobody's ever satisfied, right? So it's fun watching people that I've known for 20 years, guys like Austin, in his early 20s, starting here, and to see what that guy's going to end up. He's going to be running 5s or 6s with a 4th gen F body here in 15 years somehow. I don't know how, but he's going to do it, right? But it's great to be able to participate in that and help people out.
No, yeah, same thing for me. The education and like once a month, people will jump on sloppy and they never asked a question ever, but they will be like, I built this. I listened to everything Matt said. I read all of the stuff. I built this car. It makes 650 wheel. It's heavier and it goes 10.0. I couldn't be happier with it. It starts, runs, drives, blah, blah, blah. And that's very rewarding to me. That's like one of my favorite things. If nothing else, if no money, no sponsorships, nothing, that's super rewarding, as cheesy as it sounds. Because obviously I'm all about this for 15 years. I just give everything away. So, and then Elgin sent me like a pallet of cams. I haven't used one of them. I gave them all the people I know. So the other
Right.
day, someone's like, "Do you have a cam?" I said, "No, I don't. I don't have any left. They're all gone." And luckily enough, I kept the Summit Stage 2 from 8s for 8, and I
Yep.
got this block soon enough that I could just put the cam in it and leave it in there, because I probably would have given that away too. I would have been asking you for a Summit cam.
Yeah, it's no problem. We've tried to keep these parts priced very, very competitively. And people are asking, like, how do you price them the way that you do? Well, the fact is when you have a lot of these things made at once, you can get some
Yeah.
pretty good pricing from manufacturers, contract manufacturers and such. And we like to pass that on. So the quality is outstanding. And we just, charge them at a good value. We sleep well at night knowing that we've done that. All right, so we will, catch up with you. I don't know if you're going to try to get this car together this year, or if it's going to be, early next.
It should
But,
start rolling
we'll catch.
pretty quickly after it's going in for all the chassis stuff, and then after that, I can just start
Okay.
mowing, because there's a fab guy that lives like right down the street, and I'm going to have him do the turbo kit, because now everything is so nice I can't do an awful job on anything. So I'm getting lots of help from people I know to make it all nice, and I'd like to keep this thing for a long time, obviously, with how nice it's going to be and have air conditioning and everything. So
Awesome. All right. Well, for everybody's fans here, both, the Sloppy Mechanics fans and Summit Racing fans, we'd encourage you to head over to the Sloppy Facebook page, the public page over there, and see some cool stuff. And then obviously, for more good, great Summit content like this, be sure to, like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that fun stuff for notifications. And, we'll have Matt on a little bit later, along with other, great folks that do really cool things like Matt does. And anyway, Matt, thank you again for joining us today. And, look forward to seeing what you do next.
thank you.